So it's time to move on with the program and introduce our next speaker for the day. She was here last year as well. It has become a tradition of this conference, it seems, to bring in one of last year's speakers to following year. And this year it's Lisette that we bring in. She's a renowned expert on remote and hybrid working. She's dedicated to helping teams work effectively from anywhere, and she's even written a book called The Work Together from Anywhere Handbook. She hosts a podcast on the topic, she facilitates workshops and so on, and she's a keen Depeche Mode fan, I take it. Lisette Sutherland.
Okay, thanks. All right, thanks for having me back. And before we start, I know it's an Agile audience, so I always have to say I am not related to Jeff Sutherland. Just a fun coincidence, just a fun coincidence. And it's exciting to be back a second year in a row. In the last year, the whole remote first versus return to office debates has been raging. And I wanted to find out, what are the most successful remote first companies doing? Now, when I say remote first, I don't mean that they're remote, right? Most of us are hybrid these days. So if you have some aspect of your work that's remote or people that you work with that are remote, that's what I mean by remote first, right? We have to work remote as if everybody were remote. And what I found in the last year is that the companies that were doing it best were working in a very intentional way. And in fact, a new role has emerged out of this, and it's called the head of remote. And it's called something different in every company, whether it's more on the operation side of thing or more on the people side of thing. But this new leadership position, there's a little bit of an echo, so I'm a little distracted. But this new leadership position basically ensures that remote first is built into the DNA of a company so that everybody can work anywhere. We'll talk a little bit more about this role as we go on. And so what we're going to talk about today a little bit is this debate, the remote first versus mandates debate. And what I hope to do is leave you with some tips for how you can navigate this debate yourself. And before I go into it, I always have to say, I have worked in offices before. I haven't done it in a long time, but I have worked in offices before. This is me in the 1990s in my cubicle, and I am not anti-office. What I want is for people to work where they're most productive and where your teams are producing the most value. All right. We all know how we work has changed over the last 30, 40 years, right? Fundamentally changed. It creates both opportunities and challenges, as any change does. But if we go back to the old way of working in the 1980s and 90s, right? We have the cubicles, you can hear the background noise, right? We can hear people walking around and the coffee cups clinking. If you were really lucky back then, you had high cubicle walls, so you had a little bit of privacy, it seemed like. But I know about me, my cubicle was right outside the copy machine. It was always really loud, right? And if I look back at that picture of me in my cubicle, you'll see that I've got these speakers here. They were really good speakers for at the time. And I remember I was just working and playing my crazy experimental music all day long. So shout out to my cube mate, Canadian Dave, for putting up with that for all of those years. Like, it seems kind of unimaginable now. But if we go to the new old way, and this is now sort of the predominant office style all over the world, is these open offices, right? Most of us have nice open offices. We have wooden furniture and lots of light and plants. Some of us have really nice offices, right? This is the Google Dublin office. They've got these vibrant colors and places for people to collaborate and sit. But most of us just have average offices, and some of us have terrible offices. This is my best friend, Abe. He lives in Phoenix, Arizona. He's a senior software engineer. We've known each other for 25 years now. We met at a party and we just didn't stop talking 25 years later. Abe works in what he calls a development farm. Just rows and rows of desks and monitors and engineers with their noise-canceling headsets working all day long. I see a lot of nodding, so there are some developer farmers in here. Now, what was particularly bad about Abe's office was that they didn't have enough bathrooms for the capacity of people that were there, a real problem. In addition, these bathrooms are in the United States, where the gap in the door is a thing there. Like, I always go back to the States thinking, like, how is this a thing? But they have these gaps in the door. So not only do you not have enough bathrooms for everybody in the office, but you also just don't have enough privacy, right? So it's a real problem. And remote work's been around for a long time. I mean, in the early 2000s, we started getting the social media. We have the Facebooks and the LinkedIns. By the 2010s, we're starting to get online project management tools like Trello and Slack and Zoom. In fact, Abe and I worked at a company together in 2009 building an online project management tool called QTask. And then in 2020, everything changes overnight. And people like Abe go home and they build their ideal workspaces, right? High definition monitors, really comfortable chairs, nice lighting, a little microphone, and most importantly for Abe, a private bathroom, right? That's the thing that he really liked the most. Some of us weren't so lucky. We went home to big families or roommates or, not great workspaces. Working at your kitchen table is good, or having a meal at your kitchen table is good, but working there all day is no fun at all, right? Not a proper workspace. And so what we saw is that the companies who were remote first made a seamless transition during the pandemic. Companies like Doist and Toggle and hundreds of people that I've actually interviewed on the Collaboration Superpowers website in the last 10 years, Zapier, they all made a totally seamless transition when the pandemic hit. And a lot of us saw the value. Right? We were commuting less, spending more time with our families. We were hiring more places. We were getting more diverse teams. And I really thought that the remote first party was finally getting started, right? I've been in this nice warm swimming pool for over a decade, right? And I was like, hey, why isn't everybody here with me? And finally, after the pandemic, everybody started to sort of see the benefits that flexibility offered. And we were connecting in all kinds of new and exciting ways. We were in virtual offices, one of my favorite ways of working. I still work in a virtual office to this day. And my facilitators and the clients that I work with, they just stop by when they need something, so we don't have to schedule meetings all the time. Some people were using telepresence robots, right, where you can beam in using the, like Zoom or anything, and then you can just drive yourself around using the arrow keys on your keyboards. Others of us were experimenting with virtual reality or augmented reality. And then we even had holograms. This was from years ago. This was an advertisement for a hologram, and it was a doctor making house calls as a hologram, right? So there was all kinds of new and exciting technology happening. And yeah, the remote first party was really getting started, and a lot of us were thriving in that environment. And at the same time, there were a lot of empty office buildings, right? And a lot of empty downtown areas. And one by one, the return to office mandates started rolling in. Dell, Amazon, JP Morgan, the US federal government, IKEA, I just heard a couple of weeks ago, right? One by one, these mandates started rolling in. And even just 2 weeks ago in Fortune magazine, they said bosses are fed up with remote work for 4 main reasons. Some of them are undeniable, right? And some of those reasons they say are productivity is down, people are disappearing, the company culture is suffering, and remote is bad for new hires and juniors. And there is pushback. But the dinosaur leadership is standing firm, right? They are mandating us back to the office with Jamie Dimon famously saying, I don't care how many people sign that effing petition. So I personally believe that these mandates will be defeated because to me, the problem's in the name. It's a mandate. Right? You could mandate me to take a hot bath every night and I still wouldn't like it, right? So the problem really is in the name. And we're being mandated to go back and work in a way that doesn't work for us or our teams anymore. The world of work has moved on, and it seems like senior leadership is trying to shove us back into the way that we're working before, but the shape is different. Everything's different now. So, Abe's going from these wonderful home office to going back to commuting to long rows of empty desks where he sits at an inferior workstation, right? His monitors don't have the same high definition as they do at home, and he's just Zooming with his colleagues all day. So these mandates are resulting in absolutely absurd behavior, and it's really frustrating people. So before I continue, I want to turn the floor over to you and just give you a few minutes to talk with somebody next to you or somebody you haven't met yet, and just describe, are there absurd or frustrating things that you've seen or experienced yourself? So we'll just do 3 minutes, and if you don't want to, no problem, just say pass to your neighbor and just take 3 minutes for yourself. I know some people are like, oh my God, I hate this, I hate this, I hate this. It's okay to pass. But we're also at a conference where we're trying to meet each other, right? These places are all about networking, so take the opportunity, and if I could ask, feel free to stand, right? Get the blood moving so you don't have to sit here for the rest of the time. Feel free to stand. We'll just take 3 minutes. What's the most frustrating thing you've seen? Let's get it out. Get it out. Here we go. All right. All right. 3 minutes went fast. I don't know if we have the microphones handy. Does anybody have a particularly absurd or frustrating experience or story that they want to share? Anybody? I heard you talking. All right. I think we all know of one or two, right? So these mandates, there's a real cost to these mandates. And the most obvious one is people leaving the company, right? And this is happening all over. Remote jobs are in hot demand right now. Thousands of applications for every single remote job that are out there, right? And my sister is married to a big muckety-muck at Amazon. And over the holidays, he confided to me that when Amazon did their mandates, it was painful. They lost some really, really good people. You don't hear about that so much, but it was a really painful process. So 1, we lose good people. 2, we start to lose some trust, right? This just came out in Financial Times that office attendance is becoming a performance metric. And in that same article, Debbie says, nothing says I don't trust you like a mandate with badge swipes monitoring your every move, right? So it erodes trust. But I think the biggest thing that it does is it creates resentment. And resentment is dangerous because it's destructive, right? It makes us actively want to do something. This is from the work from home subreddit, which of course I can't help but be a part of. And a woman saying, yes, folks, forget work or happiness, productivity or saving hours of commute time. We must all drag ourselves back to soul-crushing fluorescent lit cubicles to save that one overpriced small business near the office. When was the last time we forced people to rent DVDs to save Blockbuster, right? So you can hear the frustration and the resentment in the voice. And I want to play for you a quick video of an interview that I did with Abe, actually, after his office implemented the mandates.
It feels like what we're dealing with is people at the top who just have this almost religious belief that somehow there's going to be magic happening at the water cooler because when we're all co-located. And the problem is that they seem to be impervious to any data that would contradict that narrative. And the data is just massive that says that that's not how it works. And if rather than mandating us to come into the office 2 days a week, treating us like adults and saying, you guys decide when it's going to work for you guys to come into the office, that kind of a concession to a recognition that we are adults who can make good decisions for the company, that would go a long way to improving the morale of the team.
Right, the morale of the team tanked. All they wanted was to be treated like autonomous adults who could make the right decision for the company. They're not anti-office. They just want to schedule their own days, right? So what we know is that this poor implementation of hybrid practices, which we're seeing all over the world, and these outdated leadership practices, it really hurts people in businesses. And these inflexible policies, they don't just lose top talent, they affect people's lives and they erode loyalty and trust and breed resentment, right? So companies need to weigh which side of the scale that they want to be on. And if you want to be on the side of mandates, There are plenty of examples out there and people doing it to give you advice. But if you want to go remote first, then follow me and let's talk about how to build remote first practices into the DNA of your company. And again, I'm not saying go remote. That is not at all what I'm saying. I'm not anti-office. What I'm saying is I want your team to work everywhere. I want your team to be able to produce value no matter what is happening. If there's bad weather or your kids are sick at home or the plumber is coming, whatever the reason that you can't make it into the office, I want it to be seamless for everybody. Because forward-thinking organizations realize that they need more than policies and mandates. They need deliberate, intentional leadership to ensure that flexibility leads to progress and not chaos. And what we're seeing right now is a lot of chaos. So that's where this head of remote position comes in. And I found about it because I was interviewing people about how they were doing successful remote first work. And this position kept coming up over and over and over again. And I thought, interesting. So then I started specifically looking for heads of remote. And I interviewed 20 plus heads of remote and created a new podcast series about the position. And as I was writing down the tips, after I wrote my first book, I should say, at Work Together Anywhere, I was like, never again. I will never write a book again. That was horrible. I had this like romantic notion that I was going to be a writer and have my cappuccinos in my wood cabin, and it was like nothing at all like that at all. And so I said, I'm never writing another book again. This one just kind of wrote itself. It started as a Google Doc. I invited all the heads of remote in to just check the facts. They started adding things to it. Before we knew it, it's a 100+ page document for anybody that wants this position or is curious about it, or we even have a section in there of, if you're just an individual at a company, here's what you can do to create more flexibility. So definitely go ahead and check that out. And in order to describe the position, I want to play a video clip of Nadia Vatalides. She is now the head of people at Doist. And I want to just show you how she describes this position.
A head of remote, I think, has replaced your very traditional operations function or process function. So if you imagine a role that literally orchestrates how a company should be operating, right? And so traditionally, I think we all might have had a chief operating officer that sets the boundaries of how things run in an organization day to day. I think a head of remote is replacing that in companies that works remotely by design.
And I think she hits on the key work. They work by design. They're intentional about how they're working, and that is the key to making this work. So what she says is that this position sits somewhere between operations, right, the structure, the tools, and the policy, and people, the well-being, the development, the culture, right? And it sort of sits somewhere in here. And I interviewed another head of remote, Kenneth Hellam. He's the head of people at, he's the chief of people at Ultimate Beauty, and here's how he describes what he does.
But for me, a head of remote role sits somewhere between operations, how we run the business, and people, how we make happy, healthy, engaged people. And when I talk about my job description, I say that my job is to make sure our people are happy, healthy, engaged, and productive while working remotely.
But then what are the tangible responsibilities that you have?
First one is ways of working. Defining, implementing, measuring remote best practices. How do we operate effectively as a remote organization? So that's everything from our communication, async versus sync, the tools that we use, and that all falls into, I'd say, the more practical operations part of it. So ways of working. And the second one is the softer one, which is around engagement. And that's defining our culture, our values, building community, taking care of people's well-being, which is more difficult and harder and more important when working remotely. And finally, growth, making sure that people are developing and learning the right skills to do their job, but also to do their job remotely.
So when Kenneth first started, what he did is he implemented 3 metrics at the company. So they measure profit, revenue, and sentiment. So what he says is, if we have a really profitable quarter, but our people are unhappy, it wasn't a good quarter. And the same is vice versa. If the people are really happy, but we didn't make enough money, that's also not a good quarter. So when he started, these were sort of the 3 main metrics he implemented. And then I was like, what is this video? Then Chase Warrington of Doist, he's the chief or the head of operations at Doist. I asked him, what did he do when he first started?
What did you do when you started?
We started looking at like the tools that we were using. Like a great example is like we had built a 1,200-page handbook over years, but it was never really built intentionally with proper tooling and proper guidelines and things like that. It had sort of just been like hacked together and not using an ideal tool, not really putting the right guidelines in place. And so we looked outside. We said, what are other companies doing? Documentation's a key part of having a thriving remote first culture, but we really probably weren't doing it as well as we thought as well as we could. So we did a full revamp of our handbook, for example. And then we looked at how we connect and how we collaborate with each other offline, when we come together in the physical space and actually have time together in person. And we said, we can do this at a much higher level. We think this is actually really important to making remote first work. So let's rethink how we're doing that.
So they really thought about when we're together, what kind of work are we going to be doing together, right? If you're going to be at the office, you don't necessarily want to be doing deep coding at the office, right? You want to be there to collaborate and brainstorm and strategize. When Diana, she's the head of people at Toggle, when she first started, she created a list of tools of what everybody at the company was using, what all the subscriptions were out there. And what she found was that there were so many subscriptions, unused subscriptions that people had started and not stopped, that she wouldn't admit the amount of money that they saved in the interview. But it was a substantial amount of money. So as the head of remote for Toggle, she started by just creating sort of a tools depository. So I believe every company can benefit from going remote first, right? It's all better because the world of work has changed and also the way we live has changed, and somebody is always going to be remote. But you may not have a head of remote at your company, or you may work for a company that doesn't want to be remote first. And in that case, I feel that every person can play a role. And because I know we're not an audience full of heads of remote tonight, I wanted to really focus on what can we as individuals do to prepare for what I think is the inevitable flexibility that is coming our way, right? We've gone from all remote, we're sort of swinging to this back to office thing, but I think the pendulum's coming back and we're gonna find a better balance in the future. So as individuals, where can we start? Well, we have to start by really knowing ourselves and knowing what we want and then advocating for that. So Greg McEwen is a leadership guru, and he says, if you don't prioritize your life, somebody else will. There's also, I think, something that's known as the Santa Claus principle. If you don't ask for what you want, you get something else. So it all starts with knowing, what is it that I want? And a good example is my husband hates remote work, like hates it. Whenever he's looking for a new project or a new job, he's always looking for where can I work with people in an office or in another location. I'm exactly the opposite, but we know what we want and we're advocating for that in ourselves. And one of the practices that I always encourage people to do is create a personal user manual for yourself. What is it that you need to be productive? What do you need? And what should other people know about working with you? Right? A personal user manual just documents the basic things. Like for me, I hate talking on the phone, but I really like video calls. That's something that's good to know about working with me. And before AI, I was a really slow writer, right? So I had to take a lot of time to get things done, right? So all of these things, the languages I speak and my working hours, all of these things I put into a personal user manual, and people can get to know me really quickly when they go through that. The next step up is to create an agreement with your team for how you're going to work together. Just basic things. What are the tools you're going to use? What are the expected response times? Or what happens in an emergency, right? You don't want to email the fire department when your house is on fire. You kind of want a different procedure for that. So what do we do on our teams? Creating a simple team agreement takes away a lot of the basic misunderstandings. And I really think that team agreements and company handbooks are going to be super powered by AI AI, because this is where AI really shines in that knowledge management. And Marshall Goldsmith made an incredible tool, I feel. He calls it marshallgoldsmith.ai. He trained his own AI on all of his books and all of his interviews and everything he said. And now you can just go and ask Marshall Goldsmith a question and it'll respond as if it's Marshall Goldsmith, right? So he wanted to create this so that his legend would live on after he dies. Sounds great to me. But as individuals, I think the most important thing we can do is just lead by example. We have to be the change that we want to see in the world. And you can start by just modeling good asynchronous communication, right? In your messages, putting the links and the context and anything the other person needs in order to move the ball forward, right? Just really getting good at asynchronous so we don't have to have meetings all the time. Also, planning where the work gets done, just like Chase was saying in his interview. Nobody wants to commute for an hour to go to an empty office and sit at an inferior workstation Zooming with people all day. It breeds resentment. So we really have to decide where it is that we want to work, or just design where it is that we want to work. And then a big thing is we can work out loud. We can make our work more visible to others. It should be really easy for someone to look at what we're doing and how it's going at any given time. And in the last couple of years, I've joined the OBEA Association, and an OBEA is sort of like a hub of operations, right? All the dashboards and metrics and everything you need is in one room. They also have virtual OBEAs, which is where I've been focusing. But making our work visible and making it work out loud is one of the keys to sort of the successful way of doing it. Another thing we can do as individuals, host events, virtual coffees, virtual co-working, right? I've hosted hundreds of virtual co-working sessions, just opportunities for people to get together. Last year, my company, Collaboration Superpowers, we won a big contract with the United Nations to give them workshops on virtual project management and cross-cultural communication. And we found that they enjoyed the workshops and the content, but actually what was really important was that they got together and talked to each other for the first time, right? And we thought, all they really need is virtual coffees, right? All they need is just an opportunity to talk to each other. And then the last tip that I'll mention is we should check in on each other, right? That's one of the big things individually that we can do. I want to say attention happens, no, I can't remember the quote now. Something happens when we pay attention to each other, right? Losing my thoughts, but something happens when we pay attention to each other. So just check in on people and see how they're doing. So my advice, just like Nicholas said this morning, is we just start. We don't have to know exactly where we're going. We just need a general direction. So small, imperfect actions can go a long way. And my old mentor used to tell me, first do it, get something out in the world, right? It's better than nothing. Then do it right, then do it better. And I've sort of lived by this creed ever since. So again, we come back to the remote first versus mandates debate, and we all have to decide what we want. And I believe we have better lives when we can schedule ourselves. And what I'd like to do is end with Abe and Abe's advice for people out there.
What I would ask you, if you are a person who has the power of making this decision for your company, is think about whether or not you want to treat your employees as adults and whether or not you trust them enough to have the best interests of the company and the productivity of the company at heart. And I would assume that you could say, yes, I think they're all adults and they have the best interests. So then think very hard about why you're not treating them like adults. Because that's how it comes across to them if you're mandating that they come in on particular days. As for the other side, for people who are in the position that I'm in, where we're subject to these decisions, I guess the only advice I have is to keep advocating for being treated like an adult. I mean, that's what it comes down to. If you can make people understand that the way that the mandates come across it's infantilizing, then I think we'll ultimately win this battle.
Now, Abe left his company and found a job that was more remote or that gave him a little bit more freedom. He is the best senior software engineer I have ever met. I would work again with him in a heartbeat if the opportunity ever came up, right? It was a real loss for his company. Abe has the best work ethic of anybody I've ever seen. He and I connected over music, and the way he schedules his weeks is he puts on a Spotify playlist for 40 hours, and he works to that playlist, and he works to the very last minute. He sort of takes pride in it, right? So that's sort of the nature of Abe. Anybody would want someone like him on their team. So to end, what I'd like to say is, if you need a head of remote, call me. I can take you where you need to go, or find somebody who can take you where you need to go. If you have a head of remote on your team, help them. They are looking for you. They're looking for a champion or somebody else to be a part of that. And if your company is stuck in the past, then it's up to you to lead the way. And I encourage you to take the small steps to do that, right? It doesn't need to be a revolution. It could just be a team agreement, right? Or better asynchronous communication or working out loud. And with that, I'd like to say, please, I hope you'll check it out. The Head of Remote Quick Start Guide is free to download, and the podcast is also free to listen to. And it's got all kinds of gems out there for companies of all sizes and configurations. I know I'm a little bit early ending this, but thank you for your attention and your time, and I'll be around all day for questions and talking with people. So thank you.